Welcome back to Verum Memorare. Today, we're doing a deep dive into, well, a technology that's ancient, maybe the most ancient spiritual tool we have, repetition in prayer. Think the Rosary, the Jesus prayer.
Things often dismissed today as, mindless,
Yeah.
or worse, somehow unspiritual.
Right. But we're framing it as forgotten wisdom, almost a sacred engineering. And surprisingly, perhaps modern science is actually starting to catch up and validate it.
It really is. The data is quite compelling.
Our mission for you today is to uncover how this structured, repetitive prayer really works, how it acts as a kind of technology for transcendence, and how it can anchor us in, well, an age that feels increasingly chaotic and overstimulated. We've got sources from science, history, traditional liturgy, the whole gamut.
And it's absolutely crucial to see this isn't just about, saying words over and over. We're looking at how the rhythm, the structure, the repetition itself actually forms the soul deeply.
It's about being shaped by the practice.
Exactly. It's about becoming well-formed in grace, aligned with God's rhythm, not just performing a conscious act of saying the right things. It's about being.
Okay, but before we jump into the science and history, let's tackle that big objection right up front. What about, vain repetitions? Matthew 6.7 comes up all the time.
Yes. A really critical distinction to make, absolutely. Christ condemns batologein in the Greek. It means babble. Empty phrases, meaningless chatter, like the pagans did.
Right, the idea that you could somehow manipulate God with just volume or endless repetition.
Precisely. It's rooted in superstition, trying to force the hand of a distant, unwilling deity. That's not Christian prayer at all. That's what Christ is warning against.
So it's not the repetition itself that's the problem.
Absolutely not. The Church, drawing on the wisdom of the Fathers, like St. Augustine and later St. Thomas Aquinas, has always defended repetition when it's done with the right intention. With devotion, with love.
But what if your mind wanders? I mean, we all get distracted. Doesn't it become mechanical then?
That's a fair question, and it touches on the difference between perfection and practice. The beauty of these forms is the rhythm itself. It acts as an anchor. When your mind inevitably wanders because we're human, the familiar rhythm gently pulls you back.
Oh.
The intention isn't necessarily to achieve perfect, unbroken concentration every single time. That's often unrealistic. The intention is to offer our presence, our obedience, our humility through the form. The repetition actually helps train the heart toward that deeper disposition, even when the intellect feels scattered or dry.
So the form itself is doing some of the work, keeping you oriented even if your focus wavers, like a spiritual ballast, maybe.
That's a great image, yes. It keeps the ship upright, oriented towards God, even if the conscious mind is dealing with waves of distraction. We're talking about prayerful rhythm, not empty babble. That's the key.
Okay, that framing is really helpful. Let's dive into the science then, because honestly, the idea that simply repeating words can change our brain chemistry, it sounds almost too simple. How does it actually work physiologically?
Well, it's fascinating because modern neurotheology is essentially providing the scientific vocabulary for what contemplatives have known through experience for millennia.
Neurotheology, the study of the brain and religious experience.
Exactly. And what they find is that repetitive prayer, whether it's the Rosary, the Jesus prayer, chanting psalms, reliably induces specific brainwave states, primarily alpha and theta waves.
Okay, alpha and theta. What do those mean in practical terms?
So alpha waves are generally associated with a state of calm, alertness, relaxation, sort of a peaceful detachment, like when you're quietly focused, maybe walking slowly. It's a quieting of the busy analytical mind.
Right.
Theta waves go a bit deeper. They're linked to states of deep meditation, heightened focus, creativity, and even that sort of threshold state just before sleep, where the subconscious is more accessible. It's a state of profound inner stillness and receptivity.
So the repetition isn't just relaxing you slightly, it's actively shifting your brain into a different operational mode, suppressing some functions to enhance others?
Precisely. It's like downshifting the cognitive gears. Dr. Andrew Newber's work is really seminal here. He used brain imaging like SPECT scans.
Right, I've heard of his studies.
And he found that these kinds of repetitive spiritual practices lead to measurable decreases in activity in certain brain regions, specifically the posterior superior parietal lobe.
Which is involved in?
It's basically our orientation center. It helps us differentiate between self and other, our sense of being located in space and time. When this area quiets down during deep prayer or meditation,
You get that sense of boundlessness, unity.
exactly, that classic mystical feeling of oneness, of the boundaries of the self dissolving, the neurological correlate of losing oneself to find God, perhaps.
And it also affects the prefrontal cortex, right? The part we associate with our ego, our constant internal chatter.
It does. Repetitive practice tends to quiet down the prefrontal cortex, which is a major hub of the default mode network, or DMN.
The DMN. That's the network active when our mind is wandering, thinking about ourselves, worrying, planning.
That's the one. Our internal monologue generator, essentially. By dampening the DMN through rhythmic repetition, the prayer literally creates neurological space. It quiets the analytical I, the ego mind.
Wow. So the very act of repeating Hail Mary full of grace is physiologically chipping away at the neurological root of pride and self-centeredness.
In a very real sense, yes. It's fostering the physiological conditions for humility. It makes the mind less self-preoccupied and more potentially receptive to something beyond itself.
That's profound. But you mentioned it's not just the brain, it affects the whole nervous system.
Oh, absolutely. The effects are systemic. It directly impacts the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. The system that controls our involuntary functions like heart rate, breathing, digestion.
The fight or flight versus rest and digest system.
Exactly. Most of us, especially in modern life, spend way too much time stuck in the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. Stress, anxiety, constant vigilance. Repetitive prayer acts as a powerful physiological regulator, actively shifting the body towards the parasympathetic state, rest and digest.
And what does that look like physically? Lower heart rate.
Measurably lower heart rate, yes. Reduced levels of the stress hormone cortisol, lower blood pressure over time, a general sense of physiological calm and balance. But perhaps the most fascinating mechanism here is respiratory coherence.
Respiratory coherence, what's that?
It's when your breathing pattern and your heart rate variability sync up perfectly. It turns out that the optimal breathing rate for achieving this state, the state where your body is functioning most efficiently and calmly, is around 5 to 7 breaths per minute.
Okay.
And researchers, almost accidentally, discovered that the natural pace of reciting traditional prayers like the Rosary or the Jesus Prayer synchronized with breath often falls precisely within that optimal range, around 6 breaths per minute.
Oh, way. Seriously.
Seriously. It's uncanny. It means these ancient prayer forms developed through centuries of spiritual practice and observation, not laboratory tests.
They essentially function as perfectly optimized, medically beneficial breathing exercises.
Exactly. They embody a wisdom about the unity of body and soul that we're only now rediscovering with our scientific tools. The ancients understood, intuitively perhaps, that preparing the soul for grace involves preparing the body through rhythm, posture, and breath.
Kneeling, the sign of the cross, the chanting. It's all part of this integrated system.
It's holistic technology. Modern science just gives us the fancy vocabulary. Alpha waves, cortisol reduction, respiratory coherence to describe the effects that saints and everyday faithful Catholics have experienced for centuries. It confirms that these traditional forms are profoundly integrated spiritual and physical practices.
Okay, this idea of integration leads perfectly into the next area, which I find really fascinating. Seeing repetitive prayer not just as a conscious act, but as a way of training the subconscious mind, like building spiritual muscle memory.
Yes, the athletic analogy is incredibly apt here, because it bridges the gap between the physiological effects we just talked about and the deeper goal of spiritual formation. Well, think about how the subconscious mind learns. It doesn't respond well to logical arguments or reasoning, does it?
Yeah.
You can't just tell your subconscious, don't be anxious.
Right. It doesn't work like that. It learns through patterns, repetition, association.
Exactly. It absorbs patterns, especially when they're presented repeatedly in calm, focused, or ritualized states. Think of an athlete drilling a specific move, or a musician practicing scales, or even how toddlers learn language.
Thousands of repetitions until it becomes automatic. Second nature.
Precisely. They repeat the action until the neural pathways are so strong, so myelinated, that the correct form becomes the body's default, even under pressure. They don't have to consciously think about every muscle movement anymore.
It's muscle memory.
It's muscle memory, and spiritual repetition works in exactly the same way for the soul. When you repeatedly pray the Hail Mary, or make the sign of the cross with intention, or kneel in adoration,
You're strengthening the neural circuits associated with reverence, with humility, with trust, with the specific truths embedded in those prayers.
you are making the virtuous response, the prayerful response, the path of least resistance for your brain and body. You're training your system's default mode.
That quote from Joe Dispenza comes to mind. The body becomes the unconscious mind.
It's profoundly true. We literally embody what we repeatedly do. Our habits, good or bad, become physically ingrained. Addiction works in this way, repeated actions forging deep pathways. But thankfully, grace and virtue work this way too. Spiritual repetition is drilling the soul, embedding patterns of holiness.
And the Catholic tradition, especially traditional Catholicism, seems to just get this on a really deep level, particularly with embodied repetition.
Oh, it's fundamental. It's not just about words.
No.
Think about the sheer physicality of traditional Catholic practice, the constant making of the sign of the cross, kneeling for the consecration, standing for the gospel, genuflecting before the real presence in the tabernacle.
Striking the breast during the Confiteor, using rosary beads.
All of it. These aren't arbitrary customs tacked on. They are deliberate, repeated physical actions designed to imprint postures of reverence, adoration, humility, sorrow for sin into our very bodies.
So the body learns the prayer too. It reinforces the soul's intention.
The body becomes an active participant, acting in sync with the soul. You're training the physical instrument to be an obedient and ready servant of the spiritual faculty. It creates an embodied faith where belief isn't just an idea in the head, but a posture held by the body.
And this creates a kind of spiritual reflex.
Absolutely. When temptation arises or a moment of crisis hits or you enter a sacred space, the body almost instinctively moves toward reverence, a bow, a genuflection, the sign of the cross. It reinforces the soul's orientation before the conscious mind even fully engages. It's a built-in response system.
This connects powerfully to how children learn and internalize faith, doesn't it? Those formative imprint years.
Immensely so. Developmental psychology confirms what wise parents and catechists have always known. Those first 7 to 10 years are absolutely crucial. Foundational beliefs, emotional connections, core habits they get locked in during this period.
And crucially, children at that age learn differently. Not through abstract logic, but through
Imitation, sensory experience, and repetition. They absorb the atmosphere, the sounds, the gestures, the rhythms, long before they can articulate the theology behind it all. They mimic what they see and hear.
which highlights the genius of the traditional Catholic household environment. The faith wasn't just taught, it was lived rhythmically.
Exactly. Think about the structure. Morning offering and evening prayers recited together, maybe kneeling by the bedside. Grace before and after every meal, without fail. The Angelus bell ringing, maybe reminding the family to pause and pray.
The family rosary, perhaps in the evening. Observing feast days, fasting days. It was woven into the fabric of daily life.
It wasn't an intellectual seminar. It was, as you said, subconscious catechesis through total immersion. The children learned to associate specific sounds, actions, smells, incense, holy water, beeswax candles with reverence, peace, the sacred.
The faith entered through the senses, through the body, through repetition, embedding itself much deeper than just the rational mind.
And this is why that early formation is so incredibly resilient. Those deep, positive, repetitive experiences create spiritual instincts, anchor points that often remain even if someone drifts away intellectually later in life.
The spiritual muscle memory persists.
It does. We see it constantly. People who haven't practiced their faith in decades, facing a sudden crisis, a death, intense fear, and instinctively, automatically, they make the sign of the cross, or the words of the Hail Mary come unbidden to their lips.
The training survived the intellectual arguments or the indifference.
The foundation remained buried, waiting to be reactivated, which brings us right back to that profound theological principle, lex orandi, lex credendi.
The law of prayer is the law of belief.
It perfectly encapsulates this whole process. What we pray repeatedly shapes what we truly believe, not just on an intellectual level, but existentially, in the core of our being. Repetition embeds the great mysteries, the Trinity, the Incarnation, the real presence, the communion of saints, deeper than rational argument alone ever could.
When a child or adult repeats, "I believe in God the Father Almighty," week after week, year after year, in the context of sacred liturgy,
It builds a bedrock of reality, an intuitive grasp of truth that is incredibly hard to shake, even by sophisticated skepticism. The praying forms the believing.
Okay, so we've established the science, the subconscious training. Now let's get to the ultimate goal. Using repetition to actually open the soul to the divine. This idea of prayer as creating a state of transcendent receptivity, opening the portal as we framed it earlier.
Yes, and this requires a shift in perspective. We need to see prayer not primarily as us talking to God, but as us preparing ourselves to receive God, to listen, to become receptive to His grace.
And repetition is a key technology for that preparation.
It is. And interestingly, both structured repetition and its apparent opposite, deep silence, function very similarly in this regard, neurologically speaking. They're like two paths to the same destination of inner stillness.
How can repetition, which involves sound and words, achieve the same result as silence? That seems counterintuitive.
Because in deep rhythmic prayer, the words transform. They cease to be primarily carriers of intellectual meaning and become vehicles of rhythm and atmosphere, like chant. The focus shifts from analyzing the content to inhabiting the flow.
Yeah.
And both that rhythmic flow and profound silence have the same effect neurologically. They suppress the default mode network, that constant inner chatter we talked about. They quiet the analytical ego.
And they encourage those alpha and theta brainwaves.
Exactly. They induce a non-discursive state,
Yeah.
a state beyond constant mental calculation and analysis. It's in this quieter, more receptive state that grace is often experienced most profoundly, not as something we grasp or figure out, but as something we receive.
So repetition strategically lowers the intellect's dominance, making space for the soul to actually listen.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's about creating the inner conditions for receptivity. The Eastern Christian tradition, especially with Jesus' prayer and hesychasm.
Hesychasm meaning stillness.
Yes, stillness, quietness. The rhythmic, often breath-synchronized repetition of Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, is explicitly aimed at achieving this descent of the intellect into the heart, bypassing the noisy, calculating mind to find that place of deep, prayerful awareness. It's about yielding control, not asserting it.
Okay, but this immediately brings up a huge point of tension, especially in contemporary Catholicism. This emphasis on stillness and form seems to run counter to a lot of modern approaches that prioritize, well, understanding everything and constant participation.
It absolutely does, and this is a critical point, particularly from a traditional perspective. There's been a significant shift, especially in some post-conciliar catechesis and liturgical thought, towards prioritizing subjective experience, intellectual comprehension, and constant novelty.
Yeah. The emphasis on understanding every single word, active participation, often interpreted as needing to be constantly saying or doing something new, making the prayer your own.
Exactly. And while the intention might be good, wanting people to be engaged, the danger, the sources suggest, is that it can inadvertently shift prayer into a very self-conscious, hyperverbal, almost performance-oriented activity, driven by the left brain's need to analyze and control,
It becomes about my understanding, my feelings, my authentic expression.
which can subtly close the very portal we're trying to open.
Oh.
The focus can drift from humbly surrendering the self to God towards performing the self for God, or even just for oneself. Am I praying right? Am I feeling the right things? Did I fully grasp that reading? It becomes egocentric.
Whereas the traditional wisdom seems to be more about losing yourself.
Precisely. Losing yourself in the objective form, the established rhythm, the ancient ritual. Trusting that the form itself will carry you and shape you even when your intellect feels cold or your emotions are numb. Traditional forms like the ancient Mass, the Rosary, the Divine Office, they're like pre-shaped vessels. They work on the soul even when our conscious contribution feels weak. They demand humility and trust in the form, not constant intellectual or emotional brilliance.
This raises a potentially uncomfortable question, though. If we overemphasize the intellect's role, trying to grasp God primarily through our own understanding rather than through humble, repetitive forms, could that actually be a form of spiritual arrogance? Maybe even dangerous?
Theological tradition would certainly argue that, yes, it carries a significant danger. It risks inverting the fundamental relationship. God is infinite, absolute being. We are finite, contingent creatures, attempting to fully grasp or master the divine mystery purely through our own finite intellectual efforts.
It's like trying to pour the ocean into a thimble.
Or worse, it subtly puts the human intellect in the driver's seat, trying to ascend to God on its own terms, rather than humbly receiving God on his terms. It echoes the ancient heresy of Pelagianism, the idea that we can achieve salvation through our own unaided efforts. Here, the effort is intellectual rigor rather than moral perfection, but the root issue of self-reliance is similar.
Trying to conjure the mystery before kneeling before it.
It's a form of usurpation, like the Tower of Babel trying to reach heaven through human technique and ingenuity alone. When the intellect is elevated above humility and obedience to revealed forms, it risks becoming an idol, a tool of pride rather than a servant of faith. God reveals himself most fully to the humble, receptive heart, often through the simplicity of rhythm and repetition, not necessarily through complex analysis.
What does Scripture or the wisdom of the saints say about this danger of intellectual pride?
Scripture is quite blunt. Christ's words, "Unless you become like little children," Matthew 18:3. That implies trust, simplicity, receptivity, not sophisticated analysis. And I thank you, Father, because you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little ones. Matthew 11.25.
So God intentionally hides things from intellectual pride.
It seems so. And St. Paul's famous warning in 1 Corinthians 8.1, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Intellectual understanding, detached from charity and humility, can lead to a sterile, self-satisfied spirituality that doesn't actually connect us to the living God. It inflates the ego rather than emptying it.
And we even see this humbling in the life of perhaps the Church's greatest intellect.
St. Thomas Aquinas, exactly, the angelic doctor. After his profound mystical experience near the end of his life, reportedly during Mass, he completely stopped writing his Summa Theologiae.
He said it all seemed like straw.
All that I have written seems like straw compared to what has been revealed to me. If the most brilliant theological mind in Catholic history concluded that his own monumental intellectual work was insignificant compared to a direct mystical encounter with God, well, that tells us everything, doesn't it?
It puts the intellect firmly in its place as a servant, not the master.
Absolutely. It underscores that ultimately faith involves surrender to mystery, not mastery of concepts. The humble heart embraces rhythm, ritual, repetition. The prideful intellect often craves novelty, analysis, control.
Okay, let's make this concrete now. Let's focus on the devotion that probably best exemplifies this whole technology of transcendence through repetition. The Holy Rosary.
Oh, the Rosary. Yes, it's a perfect case study. A masterpiece of spiritual engineering, deeply rooted in history and theology, and incredibly powerful in its effects.
Its origins are fascinating too, right? The poor man's psalter.
That's the traditional understanding, and it's beautiful. The divine office, with its 150 psalms chanted daily, was largely the domain of monks, nuns, and clergy, those who were literate and had the time. The Rosary emerged, possibly organically over time, but certainly promoted by figures like St. Dominic, as a way for the lay faithful, most of whom couldn't read, to participate in a similar rhythm of prayer.
150 Hail Marys corresponding to the 150 Psalms.
Exactly. Divided into decades, marked by the Our Father, structured around meditating on the key mysteries of Christ's life. It brilliantly democratized deep, methodical, contemplative prayer, making it accessible to everyone, regardless of education or social class.
And historically, it became particularly important during times of crisis for Christendom.
Immensely so. It became a spiritual anchor and weapon, especially contrasting with the more purely intellectual or iconoclastic tendencies emerging during the Protestant Reformation. The Rosary offered something tangible, Marian, rhythmic, deeply incarnational.
The Battle of Lepanto in 1571 being the prime example.
The classic example, the vastly outnumbered Christian fleet facing the Ottoman navy, threatening Europe. Pope St. Pius Philidde didn't just rely on military strategy, he called for all of Christendom to pray the Rosary for victory.
And the victory was attributed directly to Our Lady's intercession through the Rosary.
Explicitly so. October 7th became the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. It cemented the belief that this humble, repetitive prayer, when offered collectively with faith, could literally change the course of history, aligning human events with heaven's order.
Looking at the Rosary itself, its structure seems almost perfectly designed to induce that cognitive shift we talked about earlier. It's multisensory.
It's spiritual ergonomics at its finest. Think about the elements working together. You have the tactile input, the physical feel of the beads moving through your fingers. This is a constant grounding anchor, especially helpful for restless minds or bodies.
Right, it gives you something physical to do.
Then you have the auditory component, the rhythmic, vocal repetition of the Hail Mary, the Our Father, the Glory Be. Familiar, comforting sounds that create a sonic atmosphere.
And then the mental layer.
The mental focus on the mysteries. The joyful, sorrowful, glorious, and luminous. You're contemplating specific scenes from the lives of Jesus and Mary. This prevents the prayer from becoming purely mechanical recitation.
So it's this loop. Fingers moving, voice praying, mind contemplating.
Exactly. It's a brilliant multisensory loop. And neurologically, engaging multiple senses like this, especially with rhythm, helps quiet that analytical DMN faster. After just 5 or 10 minutes, maybe less, the mind often settles. The repetitive prayers become the background rhythm, freeing deeper parts of the mind to reflect, to feel, to simply be in the presence of the mystery being contemplated. It maximizes receptivity while minimizing the need for strenuous intellectual effort.
Let's dig into the theology behind repeating the Hail Mary so many times. Critics say it's just mechanical, or even that it focuses too much on Mary instead of Christ. How does the tradition understand this?
Well, firstly, the repetition isn't the goal, it's the vehicle. Each Hail Mary is like a breath, inhaling grace, exhaling distraction. It's a way of consistently reorienting the heart towards God through His Mother. The rhythm itself creates a space for grace.
And the focus on Mary?
The focus on Mary is profoundly Christocentric when understood correctly. Why repeat her name, her greeting from the angel Gabriel? Because Mary is the perfect model of human receptivity to God. She is the Theotokos, the God-bearer. Her fiat, her yes to God, is the archetype of faith.
So by repeating the prayer, dwelling on her name and her perfect response to grace, we're training our own souls to be more like her, more open, more humble, more receptive to Christ.
Precisely. The repetition isn't just asking for her intercession. It's a spiritual discipline aimed at forming us into the Marian disposition. We are learning to say yes to God as she did. She becomes the doorway, the mediatrix, through whom we approach her Son with the right attitude of heart.
And the mysteries ensure it stays focused on Christ.
Absolutely. The Hail Marys are never prayed in a vacuum. They're always anchored to a specific event in the life, death, or glory of Jesus Christ and Mary's participation in those events. You're praying the Hail Mary while meditating on the agony in the garden or the nativity or the resurrection. The vocal prayer provides the rhythm. The mental prayer provides the Christocentric focus. It engages the whole person, vocal, mental, physical, in contemplating the core truths of salvation history.
Yet, despite all this depth, you often hear the rosary dismissed, even within the church sometimes. It's for old ladies, it's mindless repetition. We need more spontaneous prayer.
And that dismissal, frankly, often reveals a deep misunderstanding of spiritual formation and a certain modern arrogance towards traditional forms. It reflects a lack of trust in the power of established spiritual disciplines.
What's lost when someone doesn't internalize a prayer like the rosary?
What's lost is a default pathway. Spiritual lifeline. When crisis hits real crisis, where your thoughts scatter, your emotions overwhelm you, you're exhausted or terrified, what do you fall back on? If your prayer life has only been spontaneous or purely intellectual, often there's nothing solid to grab onto.
But if the rosary is ingrained,
If the rhythm, the words, the feel of the beads are embedded in your procedural memory, in your spiritual muscle memory, it's there. It's automatic. The soul has a reflex, a familiar path back to God, even when the conscious mind is offline. It's like knitting a safety net when the weather is calm, so it's there when the storm hits. Neglecting it is like neglecting spiritual preparedness.
this brings us to that final, really poignant aspect. Why this repetitive training is often the soul's last line of defense. How it surfaces when everything else, especially the rational mind, fails.
Yes, because in those moments of extreme vulnerability, sudden terror, deep grief, intense physical pain, the process of dying, our higher cognitive functions often shut down. Logical thought, complex theological reasoning, crafting spontaneous prayers. It all just evaporates.
You revert to instinct.
You revert to what's most deeply ingrained, what's embedded not just in your conscious memory, but in your body, in your procedural memory.
And procedural memory, as you said, is much more durable than declarative memory for facts and concepts.
Far more durable. It's the memory for skills, habits, sequences, riding a bike, tying your shoes, or praying the Hail Mary by heart. That's why we see those incredible moving examples.
Like dementia patients.
Exactly. People with advanced Alzheimer's who may not recognize their own family or remember their own name, yet they can still recite the Our Father, the Hail Mary, maybe even parts of the Rosary perfectly. The disease has ravaged their declarative memory, but the procedural memory for those deeply ingrained prayers remains intact.
Or people in their final moments, perhaps after decades away from the church, whispering prayers they learned as children.
It happens frequently. The body remembers. The soul remembers at a level deeper than conscious thought. The rhythm, the words, the comfort associated with them from childhood or from periods of faithful practice, it's still there, stored in that resilient procedural memory. It's like grace stored up, ready to be accessed.
So the repetition over years builds what theology calls habitual grace, a disposition ready to be activated.
That's a beautiful way to understand it.
Yeah.
You're not trying to construct a prayer from scratch when the storm hits. You're simply stepping into the sanctuary that years of faithful, humble, rhythmic repetition have already built within your soul. The pathways are already there.
And the rosary itself seems explicitly designed for this, especially with its final petition.
Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. It's profoundly practical theology. The entire prayer is, in a sense, a lifelong rehearsal for that final hour. You are training yourself, embedding the instinct to call on the Mother of God when your own strength, reason, and perhaps even consciousness are failing. You're filling your soul's memory banks with the saving mysteries of Christ as the ultimate anchor.
Another huge advantage of these repetitive forms is simply their accessibility, isn't it? You don't need to be feeling spiritually on or intellectually sharp to pray the rosary.
That's one of its greatest mercies and signs of its divine inspiration, I think. It meets us where we are. Are you sick? exhausted, distracted by worries, grieving, you can still pick up the beads, you can still let the familiar rhythm carry you, even if your mind wanders, even if your heart feels dry.
The prayer does the work, in a way.
The form supports you, whereas purely intellectual or spontaneous prayer often demands significant mental energy, focus, and a certain level of emotional engagement. If you don't have those things, which often happens precisely when we need prayer most.
You can end up feeling guilty. I can't pray well today. My mind is too scattered.
Exactly. It can breed a kind of spiritual perfectionism or anxiety. Repetitive prayer liberates us from that and says, just show up, offer what you have, let the rhythm hold you, let Mary pray with you and for you. It ensures that faith can survive and be practiced even when our human faculties are weak. Grace doesn't depend on our brilliance or energy levels. It depends on our willingness to be present, however imperfectly.
We've talked a lot about repetition, but let's circle back to the importance of rhythm. You said repetition without rhythm is just noise.
Rhythm is the key that unlocks the power of repetition. It orders it, gives it flow, transforms it from mere mechanics into something sacred, something that resonates with the deeper rhythms of life and the cosmos. Think heartbeat, breath, seasons, tides. Creation is rhythmic.
And sacred prayer taps into that.
Deeply. Rhythm has a powerful physiological effect called entrainment. It's the tendency for our internal biological rhythms, brain waves, heart rate, breath, to synchronize with external rhythmic stimuli.
So when we listen to Gregorian chant or pray the Rosary at a steady pace, our bodies actually start to sync up with that rhythm.
Yes. The slow, measured tempos, common in traditional liturgical music and prayer, naturally encourage that shift to the parasympathetic nervous system, induce those calming alpha and theta waves we discussed. Your physiology literally aligns with the sacred rhythm.
Creating that trance-like focus, that openness.
It facilitates it, yes. It helps bypass the analytical mind and fosters a state of focused calm, of heightened receptivity. It aligns the whole person, body, mind, soul, with a tempo conducive to encountering the divine. The rhythm isn't just aesthetic, it's functional.
And this principle of repetition and rhythm extends beyond individual prayers, doesn't it? It scales up to the Church's whole structure of time.
Absolutely. The liturgical calendar is repetition and rhythm writ large, operating on a cosmic scale. It's God's own divine pedagogy, training us through cycles.
What are the layers of this?
You have the microrhythms. The Rosary may be prayed daily like the breath of the soul. Then the Liturgy of the Hours, the divine office, sanctifying the entire 24-hour cycle with prayers at set times, lauds, vespers, compline, etc., disciplining the day.
And the weekly rhythm.
The weekly rhythm of Sunday Mass, the Lord's Day, reorienting our week back to the Paschal Mystery. And overarching all of that is the grand rhythm of the liturgical year.
Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, ordinary time.
Exactly. The great cycle of salvation history, repeated year after year. We don't just remember these events, we ritually re-enter them. The waiting of Advent shapes our hope. The penance of Lent disciplines our desires. The joy of Easter redefines our reality.
So we're not just learning about these things, we're being formed by the rhythm of repeatedly living through them liturgically.
Precisely. It trains the soul to ride the currents of grace that flow through these sacred seasons. It aligns our inner lives with heaven's time, with God's story, preventing us from getting lost in the linear, often meaningless, march of secular time. We're immersed in a sacred tempo, constantly being reminded of who we are and whose we are.
Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it all together. The core takeaway seems to be that repetition in prayer, especially within traditional forms like the Rosary, is far from mindless. It's actually incredibly sophisticated.
It truly is. It's soul-deep spiritual engineering. It's validated by modern science and its effects on the brain and nervous system. It's historically proven as essential for transmitting and preserving faith across generations. And it's theologically necessary for cultivating the humility, receptivity, and perseverance required for a deep relationship with God.
And in our modern world, which bombards us with novelty, demands constant self-expression, and often feels shallow and unstable, these traditional repetitive forms offer something desperately needed.
They offer depth, stability, structure, and anchor. In an age obsessed with fleeting trends and surface-level communication, the rhythmic prayers of the Church provide a connection to timeless truth and a way to build that resilient spiritual muscle memory, that inner fortitude that we need to navigate life faithfully.
Which leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, our listener, to ponder.
We've seen that the human person seems almost hardwired for rhythm and repetition, for seeking states of unity and transcendence. Modern secular man, having often rejected or forgotten the sacred perfected forms offered by the Church, the Rosary, the Liturgy, the chant, hasn't stopped seeking those states.
He just seeks them elsewhere.
Instinctively, think about the powerful rhythmic beats and communal energy of music festivals. Think about the disciplined, repetitive rituals of intense gym workouts. Think, perhaps most disturbingly, about the addictive, endless, rhythmic scroll of social media feeds like TikTok loops or the repetitive actions in video games.
Are these secular surrogates filling the void left by rejected sacred rituals?
That's the question to ponder. Is the modern soul, designed for the deep, grace-filled rhythm of the Pater Noster or the Ave Maria, now hijacking its own divine architecture? Is it using that innate need for repetition and trance, meant to open it to God's grace, merely to feed itself an endless loop of addictive, ultimately empty, secular noise? It's a sobering thought.